Hello and welcome to December's edition of First Fridays with Marion Soil and Water Conservation District. My name is Becky Panetta. I am the Agriculture Conservation Planner here within our district. And today I'm happy to introduce to you Milan Davis. Milan has worked for the State of Alaska Department of Natural Resources, the American Horticultural Society in Alexandria, Virginia, and worked for over 10 years in the nation's capital, 6 years as manager of field operations at Casey Trees, and 4 years as a lead arborist at the Urban Forestry Division for the District Department of Transportation. Milan has also worked for over 10 years in the farm and nursery industry, specializing in orchard operations, specialty crops, and organic vegetable production. He graduated from Virginia Tech with a Bachelor of Landscape Architecture and has an ISA certified or has been an ISA certified arborist since 2006, ISA certified municipal specialist, and most recently has become an ISA board certified master arborist.
Thanks, Becky, and thanks to Heath for inviting me to do this talk. She asked me to do this, and I always like talking about trees, especially native trees. So thanks again to Marion Soil and Water Conservation District for hosting me on this. I will probably ramble on some of these slides and hopefully leave enough room for questions at the end. Can you see my screen okay, Becky?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right, so this first slide probably sums it up for me on native trees, and we'll talk a little bit about each one of these pictures as we go along. But just thinking about the word native, to me, when I think of native trees, I try to think about what was on the land where we are standing now, or where you're thinking about planting native trees, and sort of how that comes into context with what decisions you make and why. So yeah, here we are in the Willamette Valley, and for me, thinking about native plants, obviously that's something you all know well, but how do you use that for your own thinking about what trees are going to be planted here? So thinking about the indigenous peoples that inhabited the land that you're going to be planting on, how far back do you go to be a native species? That's also another question I guess you could end up asking yourself, but for me it's probably pre-European settlement. Obviously native plants in this region to the Kalapuyan people were they were very progressive land managers. They spent a lot of time managing the forest, more so than many of the other indigenous peoples that are native to North America. And so thinking about how they were gatherers and foragers more than they were hunters, and so they did take advantage of all the seasons and all the plants available to them, but they did a really good job of managing those plants and spent a lot of time thinking about the management of those plants. So I wouldn't say it was not necessarily a wild native, but it was still plants that were sort of indigenous to this area. Some of those practices that they used are pretty incredible, that you would think that every portion of all these plants and trees were used for many uses in their daily life. And when it came to managing what we're talking about today, trees, very wise on how they were going to use those practices and those management tools for their benefit. Burning the understory for hunting purposes, burning the understory so they could gather acorns more readily, and at the same time this allowed them to do so many other harvesting of plants that were important to their daily life. So for me, when I think about planting native, sort of what comes to mind for me is thinking about the native peoples, and so native plants. You know, thinking about the past and how tragic it was that native peoples were taken off of their land in the way that they were. I think it's important that we respect the plants that were here, and respect their way of life. So for me, that's super meaningful in trying to think about ways that we may plant trees here with the city of Salem. I know we've done a lot of talks about doing sort of farming of a lot of these plants, so we can actually collect seed, harvest seed, and sort of create and mimic some of these areas in our city parks. So we're just beginning some of this. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the city of Salem park system, but we do have quite an extensive Oregon white oak population with camas understory. We've had lots of talks with our natural resource department and some of our horticulturalists on creating more of these sort of habitat woodland areas. And just important for me as a employee of the city of Salem to be able to take some of these park places and create connections to the past, to the land that we're on. So just a better understanding of the land that we're inhabiting and how we can make those connections. I think to me, that's what native planting is all about. Eco-inclusive versus eco-exclusive, I think is more related to monoculture and trying to find a way to bring back a lot of these processes where you can connect with native plant agriculture, restoring native plants for food production, even if it's on small scale. Let's say you're even doing it in your yard, to find a way to mimic some of those native processes. Super easy to do that in a small space. So I think just trying to make those connections. There's a lot of people out now that are doing that, and even putting this presentation together today is getting me more excited about making some of those connections to some of these groups that are doing more of this. So I'll switch it up a little bit now. I was just talking about sort of the mindset that when I think of the word native and the native trees or native plants, that's what made me sort of talk about the few previous slides I talked about. But native is a state of mind. The map represents all the places I've lived. I'll be 50 years old this year, but I've lived in a lot of different places and spent a lot of time in a lot of different places. So, native to me, that may not ring as true to someone else who's grown up and lived in a region their entire life. So being able to make a connection when you move somewhere, I think it's important to know the history, for me anyway. But so a little bit about non-native plants. Why is it so popular to plant trees that aren't native? In all of the regions or all the places that we live in, I think a lot of it is familiarity with plants. People end up planting things that they know. I think food source is obviously a pretty good one. You're going to plant trees to provide food for your family or to make money. So, agriculture. Not many of the agricultural things that are planted in a region are actually from that region. And then aesthetical regions, people want a flowering plant that that they can't find it for that region, so they'll plant something from China or somewhere non-native. I think a big reason we don't plant natives, the number one reason probably is availability at your nurseries or places that you purchase plants typically. I know a lot of the people in this Zoom meeting probably know where to buy native plants and research and find those places, but the majority of folks who go out, just the layman, and are looking for plants, those native plants aren't readily available. And why is that? My guess is it's growth rate. And I put a period after growth rate because I think that's pretty much the reason why. Being the urban forester for the city of Salem, we have a hard time finding, a large plant palette. All the nurseries grow the same species, and it's because the species that they're growing grow at a rapid rate, and they can turn around and make a profit on those trees. Let's say the tree I can think of is the beech. The American beech is a slow growing tree would be a great tree for us for a park or a street tree, but its growth rate is about half of that as, let's say, a red oak that they could turn around in 3 years, could be the same size. Another tree took 6 years to grow, so they're losing 3 years on a tree that doesn't grow as fast. What are you benefiting from planting native? That's going to be up to you, and making those connections to native plants. I'll talk about it later in the slides. That for me, it's the connection to the land, but it's also wildlife. I think that's, if I ask my staff, why do we plant native trees, and it's going to be to make that connection back to wildlife habitat and providing spaces and places for our wildlife. So I'll start talking a little bit about what I do here in Salem and about what we're doing as far as planting native trees, but I'll give you a little overview on our urban forest. We found out last year that inside Salem city limits, with LiDAR imagery, that in the right of way we have over 300,000 trees. I'm not tasked with managing all those. A lot of those are in the riparian areas, but I do manage all of our city streets and all the city parks. So probably close to 200,000 trees that we manage for the city of Salem. 70,000 of those would be street trees, which you can see on the bottom right of this slide is a GIS inventory that we're in the middle of, that we've got a little over 37,000 trees inventoried, where we capture species, size, health, location in the right of way, how big is the soil volume, planting space, sort of overhead utility lines, any other sort of specific information we want to capture about that tree. And we also use this inventory then to have a work order system where we manage planting and pruning, removals. And I started this job in January of 2020, and since that time we've planted a little over 1,800 new street trees, with about 18% of those being native trees. So from the very beginning, I did try to make a conscious effort on selecting native trees and finding native trees in some of the nurseries that we work with. Here's a little information about some of the trees we plant as natives. I don't know why it's called Quercus carryana. Wish someone knows somebody that can get this done. We should change it to Quercus elapuya, right? I don't know what Gary ever did with any of the oaks, but so yeah, just a list of some of the trees we plant. We definitely want to add more than this short list of native trees, and we're definitely starting to do a lot more riparian plantings, where we will start doing a lot more of the smaller native trees. But currently, we have a really big focus on sort of adding more Oregon white oaks to Salem Park areas, also including the mesquite trees. It seemed like a pretty large gap in between the old oaks and some of the, progression into planting. Sort of seemed like we missed quite a few years in that progression. Considerations for planting native trees and also planting non-native trees. For us, planting urban trees are really hard. A lot of the conditions of soil aren't great. Obviously, the air pollution, runoff, and planting trees under wires. But really for us, it's trying to pick the right tree for the right place that fits each spot. So when we do have an opportunity to plant natives, we take advantage of that. Also thinking about not planting trees that could become invasive is something that I worry about. Planting trees that aren't native that might reproduce readily in this climate. I've spent a lot of my time as an urban forester on the East Coast, so the conditions there are quite different than here on the West Coast, where we get most of our rain in the summer. We're here, we're getting all of our rain in the winter. So trying to think about what trees are going to do well in those type of situations and why are we planting trees. I think for me, the resounding reason why we continue to plant trees and want to plant more trees in the right of way is heat island effect, cooling the streets and cooling all the hardscape. Right behind that is wildlife habitat and making connections to people in the community through forestry. So yeah, I think, let's see. I don't know if any of you have heard the 10-20-30 rule. That's a sort of something we're trying to go by here. When I showed up in Salem, the majority of trees planted in the right of way, which were city planted trees, were resoundingly maples. I think over 25% maples in the city streets. So we've stopped planting maples over the last 3 years just to try to get back to a genetic diversity. The 10-20-30 rule, which is no more than 10% of a species, 20% of a genus, or 30% of a family is a rule that a lot of municipalities are working by right now. So something like EAB, Emerald Ash Borer, which is coming to Salem in a few years, it's in Forest Grove now, is something that's going to devastate our ash population. So fortunately, we have a really small ash population for street trees, but we do have a large ash population in our natural areas and riparian areas, which are going to be extremely hard on our aquatic life. But so just something really simple: native trees for more resiliency. I think they're going to have a climate adaptability, be able to change with climate change. Personally, I know a lot of people are doing studies right now about taking native plants, let's say from California or a region south of wherever you are, and be able to adapt those to warmer climates. But we're going to continue to plant natives, even though I know a lot of people are concerned about fir and the pine, ponderosa pine species not doing well at the moment. I think a lot of it has to do with the recent fires and the recent changes in our summertime highs, getting up into the 117s. I can't imagine any of the trees doing well with extended days over 120 degrees. So I think maybe some of these younger trees, younger seedlings and trees will be able to adapt to some of these changing climates, and we'll continue to plant native trees for that reason. Community engagement is always something we're pushing for. having people make a connection to trees in their community, in front of their house or in their parks. Um, Native trees are great at water conservation. We've learned that through studying a lot of the trees that fell during the ice storm in 2021, seeing how many years of drought a lot of these trees had gone through by studying rings, which is something we've worked with Willamette University on, doing some of those studies. I don't know if you haven't read about that. A lot of interesting research has come out about the studying the size rings and sort of the lifespan of some of these 400-year-old oak trees that fell during the ice storm. And then the obvious one is the ecological benefits for habitat. Something we started doing last year, with working closely with our natural resource manager, is trying to make connections in Salem from our city park. And this picture on the right side of the slide is one of our city parks. And we've gone in and all the blue dots in this image are new trees that we planted in 2 different planting events, but we're trying to make connections from a city park back to the Willamette River, which is on the left side of the slide, to connect these, what we call them are woodland habitat areas. So we're trying to create woodland corridors through street tree plantings. And in these street tree plantings, we try to mimic some of the native habitat. So planting native species, we were planting Oregon white oak and big leaf maple, some cascara in these plantings. So that's something neat that we've started doing and will continue to do, connecting our city parks. So these connected areas can sort of maintain larger wildlife populations, native wildlife populations. And I think for the single person or someone who doesn't own a farm, I think you're able to do a lot with a little bit of space, even planting one tree, like this Oregon white oak pictures, providing tons of habitat for all kinds of wildlife. So, crazy what these oak savannas can provide, and we have a lot of them here in Salem. So I've enjoyed learning about them, and I've learned a lot even just putting this slideshow together for you guys. But knowing that one of these Oregon white oak savannas can support more than 200 species of wildlife is pretty remarkable. Yeah, we talked a little bit about this. Native trees can provide more resilience. I keep using the word resilient because I think, native trees and species are very resilient. They're connected to the space, they're connected to the ground and to the environment around them. But a lot of studies have been done recently about climate change with the oaks and with the recent fires, that planting oaks is going to be a positive thing moving forward. They can adapt to the soils here, and potentially to climate change. And so hopefully Oregon white oak has the potential to bridge that in an uncertain future. So I have heard recently, what I talked about before, that native trees from nearby regions will be a trend. So you may see more of, let's say, valley oaks coming from California. Any of the oak species I think are going to be a great choice. We've planted quite a few oaks recently, Quercus lobata. We're going to try and plant silverleaf oak. We've planted lots of Quercus ilex over the last couple of years. I know a lot of these trees aren't necessarily native to this region, but I think they're a lot of qualities that we're looking for in trees, slow growing and just sort of more resilient to the warmer summers that I think are not going to change. I don't know if I sped through that, but definitely willing to take any questions from anyone. And again, thanks to Becky and Heath for having me.
Yes, thank you, Milan. We do have some questions in the chat, and as we go through these, if any of you have other questions to add, go ahead and keep adding them to our chat. But I'll go ahead and start reading through these questions for you.
Okay.
Let's see. How can we get involved in helping plant and maintain native plants in the Salem area?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly people could reach out to me directly. I could share my email, or you guys could share my email. That would be fine. I think Friends of Trees is a good place to start if you're interested in planting trees. We do have a contract with Friends of Trees to plant trees with us in the right of way. We've done one planting already with Friends of Trees at River Road Park. We're doing a planting with them on January 7th in West Salem. But we also we do riparian plantings with them, where we'll plant plugs or seedlings, native plants along riparian areas. But then we also do larger tree plantings, where we're planting 6-7 foot tall trees in our city parks or in our city streets.
And just so our audience knows, we can also on our website, we'll put Milan's email address, like you just said. And if there's any other links that he wants to share, we can post those on our website as well. Next question, how strong and enforceable is the Salem Trees Protection Ordinance?
Well, there are multiple ordinances for the city of Salem. We have public property ordinances where we enforce a city code on trees that's pretty strong. There's also now the recent tree code that changed, that is on private property, that the community development department, the planning department with the city of Salem implemented on March 16th, I believe, of this year, that protects trees on private property over 30 inches in diameter at breast height. So that's 4.5 feet above the ground. If the tree is bigger than 30 inches, those are now protected by the city. You have to get a permit approved for removal of those trees, and also the ordinance changed the requirement for Oregon white oaks from 24 inches down to 20. So any Oregon white oak anywhere in city limits is protected. And it's I'm sure someone could get away with it if they were sly about it. We do have lots of people calling in with people cutting trees down, and some people still aren't yet aware that there is a code protecting these trees. But there have been quite a few enforcements of this ordinance already.
Next up, where are you planting the white oak? It kind of doesn't seem like the size is right as a street tree.
Yeah, we plant Oregon white oaks in spaces. Yeah, as a street tree, it's usually a really large right-of-way space that's larger than 12 feet wide. It's typically one that we're going to plant Oregon white oaks in. We plant, like I said, I manage city parks too, so we plant a lot of understory Oregon white oaks in our city parks. So I would say the majority of the trees that we plant are in large right-of-way spaces, and in city parks, probably half and half so far.
And next up, do you add any amendments to help improve soil conditions when planting new trees?
We do. We've played around with that over the last couple of years. This year we're using biochar. So we probably use I don't remember the specific name of the product we're using, but it's a biochar we buy in bulk, and we place that in the bottom of our planting holes. And then in the summer we do we water all of our trees for the first 2 years, and we'll add something like a fish emulsion mixed with seaweed in in 2 rounds of the watering, so we provide a little bit of nutrients during the summertime as well.
Great. Are you planning to plant any cascara?
We do plant cascara, yes. Yeah, we plant cascara. I think, I don't remember the exact number I put on that slide, but I think last year we planted 20, and we found it's hard to source them, but we did find some. I think it's Beaver Lake. We're able to source some cascara, so yeah, we're going to continue to plant cascara where we think they'll do well.
I'll also just mention a little plug for our district right now. Since we're talking about sourcing native plants, we do have our native plant sale coming up, which I think will be available online as a sale in January, and then pickup is at the beginning of March. So if you're interested in that, you can check out our website and there will be information on there as well. Okay, so after that little plug, how do you manage watering planted trees in the driest part of the summer? Or do you just not water them then?
Yeah, we do manage watering. I have a crew, a dedicated crew that are out watering our street trees. Like I said, for the first 2 years, a lot of the park trees, we'll try and plant them in areas where we think they'll do well without watering. We do a lot of mulch or wood chips in the area, so when we do water them, we hope that water is sort of stored and the ground beneath it is sort of protected a little bit better. But I would say this last summer we made it to our over 800 trees that were on our watering list. We made it to them 17 times each, providing approximately 10 gallons, 15 gallons, give or take, on each tree. So we were trying to hit them, I think, bi-weekly. And we'll continue to do that. I think we're pushing and trying to create a sort of an adopt-a-tree program where residents who want to take over some of that watering for us can. It's a lot of driving around for us. We are driving in a cab over Isuzu, which is getting really good gas mileage, but still, that's a lot of resources that could be saved if we did have adopt a tree program and had neighborhood folks who wanted to do the watering. And we've talked about a rebate from the water department or something like that, where you got, if you were someone who signed up for that, you could get a rebate on your water bill.
That sounds like a pretty neat program. Get a little crew of people citywide taking care of the trees.
Yes.
Sounds fun.
Yeah. Citizen foresters.
Yeah. Next question. Would you be able to provide a link to the research you mentioned on the 400-year-old oaks vulnerable in the ice storm?
Yes. And
Okay,
you could
great.
definitely, there's been a few articles in the Statesman Journal related to that. Professor David Craig at Willamette University and one of his colleagues have been doing the research, and it's a really neat program they're doing with some of their students as well. So yeah, I'll try and get that right now.
Awesome. Yeah, if you could, you can even send it to either Heath or I, and then we'll make sure it gets on the website for you.
Okay.
Let's see. Next up, what is your strategy and recommendations for Oregon ash? Do you think we should stop planting them now or start taking them out and replanting, or do you have any other suggestions? What trees would you recommend instead of ash?
Yeah, great questions. We are currently working with ODA and ODF, and then sort of coming up with our own management plan for dealing with emerald ash borer. Because I came from the East Coast and because I dealt with emerald ash borer previously, as soon as I got here, I took ash off of our planting list 3 years ago. So we haven't planted any ash over the last 3 years. I think if it's on your property, depending on the size of the tree, you could certainly, we're going to actively start managing our population. We've already started removing trees that are in fair to poor condition. knowing that we want to get new trees established as soon as possible, and we're removing any of our smaller caliper trees immediately to start replanting. I think we will do some sort of treatment for our larger trees that are in good condition, although the treatment isn't something that's going to, sustain over time, because you have to do it biannually, and as soon as you stop, the tree is susceptible to the borer. So, and it happens pretty fast once a tree's infected. So, that could be your choice. If you have nice ash trees on your property, you could certainly leave some. You could certainly start taking them out. I have seen emerald ash borer firsthand, and it's devastating, and it happens really quickly. So it is something that's going to be super unfortunate to the region and devastating. But yeah, so we're coming up currently with the management plan. We think it's about 3 years away, 3 to 5 years away from making it to Salem, but it could be faster if it's transported through firewood. That's one of the biggest things they're asking folks not to do, is transport firewood, especially from the Forest Grove area to other parts of Salem. It's the only place that it's been spotted so far. But yeah, not a whole lot of management techniques to be done. Like I said, we will do some injections and start doing planned removals and replacements.
Can you talk about black cottonwood? I have heard that they will not be able to regenerate naturally because of the change of in flood regime due to dam management.
That's outside of my wheelhouse. I don't know. Is that something you could answer, Becky? I don't know enough about that to speak on that topic.
I don't either.
Good
We'll go
question.
ahead and go on to the next question. Yeah. Let's see. How do we get on your list for planting street trees?
Just send me an email. We'll plant a tree next week.
Awesome.
I love it when people want trees. It's usually the other way around, unfortunately. You wouldn't believe how many people don't want a street tree. So currently we are working on an opt-out sort of place by place, but I have over 6,000 locations on our city map that say there are available locations to plant new street trees. So
Wow.
If we haven't been to your address, we'll come visit it, and we can work with you on putting the right tree in the right place.
Cool. What are the top 3 trees you would recommend we plant as street trees?
Well, the top 3, it would just depend on what your available soil volume is. So we have a list on the city website that you can go to. Just type in trees on the city website. It'd take you to a link or to a page where you could find a link to the trees that we plant, and each one of them has specific sort of width between the curb and sidewalk that we recommend planting certain trees. But we're planting everything from any of the native trees that I listed earlier to black gum is a really popular choice for us this year. Bald cypress is one of the ones we've started planting more readily because of its heat tolerance and drought tolerance. We're planting a lot of elm cultivars, which are hybrid elms that have proven well to be a good city tree. I think London plane is probably another tree that's a hybrid sycamore with Chinese plane tree that's done really well in a lot of urban environments as a street tree. But we are planting a lot of oaks as well. Evergreen oaks, we've started planting more evergreen oaks recently. Holly oak and silverleaf oak, which they're hard to source, but if you can find them, they're a beautiful tree and a tree that doesn't get too big in some of these spaces, or it grows well in a confined space. So I could keep talking about street trees. I could probably go for another few minutes, but I'll stop.
Great. We're getting a lot of great questions in the chat here. I'm really impressed with our audience participation today. Let's see, next up, I am considering planting a crabapple to draw in more birds to my yard who love the fruit. Is the Oregon crabapple, the Pacific crabapple, and the Western crabapple all the same tree? And can they live in soil under white oaks and Doug firs?
Yeah, good question. I don't know if they're the same tree. What were the two trees again?
The two trees that they would be living with were white oaks and Doug firs.
And I thought she asked if, or they asked if there were, if two of the crab apples were the same species.
Oh, the crab apples were Oregon, Pacific, and Western.
Probably not, I would say, because there's probably thousands of crab apples, and but I don't know enough about either one of those trees to tell you specifically. You know, I think as long as they're not planted too close to the trunk of an Oregon white oak or to a Doug fir, I would say underneath a Doug fir may be a little harder just because it's the filtered light is going to be less, and the crab apple is probably going to want some more sun that could be provided than the planting underneath a Doug fir. Just depends on how much filtered light is coming through. And then again, with the Oregon white oak, it'd be the same. I would say along the drip line of the tree, sure, it could survive that and thrive, but it could be site specific. And I mean, crab apples are very resilient and could grow in most soils, so I would say yes.
All right. Once a tree is removed by the city in a residential area, do you replant another tree in its place?
Common practice is for us to plant a tree back where we remove one, unless there are, infrastructure conflicts. In the past, I think a lot of trees were planted by contractors in some of the new neighborhoods, and not much thought was put into where the tree was placed. So we do have a lot of trees around town that are planted too close to water meters, or on top of water meters, or next to fire hydrants, or next to light posts, or too close to your driveway. We do have restrictions, and we stick to our standards where it's typically 6 feet away from a water meter. We can replant a tree, but yes, if a tree is removed and there is space to replant the tree per our standards, we will replant at least one tree. Sometimes we plant two trees if there's space, but that's the program we're working under now. We got funding this year from the city insurance from the ice storm, so I was able to spend $700,000 and hired 4 staff and purchased some equipment for us to grind stumps and replant trees. So we're going to be grinding over 1,500 stumps and hopefully planting about 2,000 trees where trees were lost during the ice storm. So that's ongoing. It started in May of this year, and we typically plant. When I got here, we were planting about 300 new trees a year, and this month we planted 300 trees. So we're super excited about the direction we're going as far as being able to plant more trees, and look forward to planting thousands of trees instead of hundreds of trees over the next few years. So
awesome. Could you address the challenges and opportunities of the city's maintenance of newly planted trees, such as like irrigation, mulching, etc.?
Yeah, as far as challenges for planting newly planted trees, vandalism is one. We deal with some. I would say irrigation is a good thing. We require contractors and developers when they are doing developments to put drip irrigation in. If it's irrigation related to a private property, that can be challenging. where people necessarily don't want a tree and they would rather have grass. And so the watering cycles could be different. It could be above ground watering and not drip irrigation. And some of the trees aren't, would not thrive in those sort of conditions. As far as mulch, when we do maintain our trees, when we water them, we add consistent mulch to help with sort of water management. So water less if we have generous amounts of mulch or wood chips around the tree. It does a good job of improving, I guess, water storage for those younger trees. And for younger trees, we do a 2, 5, and 8 year pruning cycle. So we're about to start that this month, where we're going to prune over 1,700 trees. Will be all hands on deck with my staff, and it takes us about 2 months, but we go out and prune trees that were planted 2 years ago, 5 years ago, and 8 years ago, to try and get good structure for a street tree. And once we've done that eighth year of pruning, we don't go back again unless we get a service request from a resident. We are working on our urban forestry master plan, where we're trying to come up with cost analysis for what it would cost for us to do cycle pruning in Salem. But currently we don't do that. We're a service request driven system. So if a resident calls and says there's something wrong with the tree, or we notice it, or that's when the tree gets pruned again. But they do get pruned on a 2 and 5 year, 5 and 8 year cycle. So we're hoping that when we leave it that 8th year, that we're leaving that tree in good condition to be central, have a strong central leader, be above the sidewalk and be above the road for an extended amount of time until we have to come back again. But that's a good question. Thanks.
Do you have experience with urban heat islands and the differences that are found between more and less affluent neighborhoods? And if yes, do you have a role in addressing that issue?
We do. So, when I was hired here in Salem in January of 2020, the parks planner and the parks natural resource manager wanted that to be a focus right away, and shared with me there's something called iTree, and there's also something called the tree equity map, which is available now through American Forests. They put that map together, which is available to anyone online. It's called the tree equity map, and it will show you sort of the canopy in areas that are less apt to, basically neighborhoods that have been redlined, let's say, in the past, are marginalized based on race or income. So I would say that it's definitely, lower income areas definitely have lower canopy. That's definitely true. I think a lot of that has to do with the planning that was involved. And then after doing this for as long as I've done it in Washington, D.C., and now here in Salem, that, you go to those parts of town and there aren't wide planting strips. Sometimes there aren't planting strips at all, or there aren't sidewalks. You're driving through some of those neighborhoods and there aren't places to plant trees. So it'll be important moving forward that the planning is more thoughtful in a lot of those parts of towns. I know that I did just come back from a community tree conference in Seattle, where a lot of municipalities are doing what would be called like sort of road cuts in some of these neighborhoods, and cutting out asphalt and curbs to make tree boxes in areas where people might not specifically be parking on some of these neighborhood streets, to actually provide spaces to plant trees. So, but anywhere we can find places to plant trees and parks. Right now we're focused on Northeast Salem and the NOLA and Elma neighborhoods. Those are both neighborhood associations where we have spent a lot of our effort and time sort of doing inventory, and we've done a lot of planting in those neighborhood parks where there were less trees planted. So that's a great question. And yes, it's near and dear to my staff and to me to make sure that we're planting trees where we have the lowest canopy in town. And so that's something we're able to see with those tree equity maps and that iTree map where they do show you the hottest parts of town. Obviously in Salem, it's the airport, but beyond that, it's a lot of the industrial areas and like you said, less affluent neighborhoods. So there is a focus on that for sure.
We have a couple of other like shout outs in the chat for other places to get plants as well. So just so people know, the Polk Soil and Water Conservation District also has their pre-order of native plants going on now. So I'm gonna plug in our neighbors there as well. And then also, let's see, the Oregon White Oaks can also be available at Mahonia Nursery. They rescue oaks from future development sites and have had success transplanting. So that might be a good place to find some more mature or larger oaks as well. Let's see, another question here. Does Emerald Ash Borer have another host?
Yes. I think it's isn't it cherry? I think
Okay.
some of the cherry farms are concerned about ash, but there's very few. I know one of them was Japanese snowbell, I think, was a tree that we don't plant a lot of. I know whatever it was. And then there was also a fruit tree that I know that it was going to affect some of the local ag, but I don't remember what specifically it was. Sorry.
No
And,
problem.
we have bought trees from Mahonia. They grow new trees from seed, oak trees from seed, which is fantastic. And they also do have they rescue oak trees, and we've bought quite a few oak trees from them here locally.
Neat. So next questions are about guarding the trees. I find this pretty interesting. What type of tree guards do you use to protect from mowers and string trimmers? And then also, do you guys do anything to protect small trees from vandalism?
Yeah, I mean, we have something called a tree guard. I don't know that there's a specific name besides that. It's a little gray guard that wraps around the base of the tree. We do unfortunately use those more often in our city parks because I've had a hard time getting all of our parks staff. We have a lot of seasonal staff too, and we also have sometimes we have adults in custody doing some of our maintenance. So just getting the word out that string trimmers, mowers, any sort of mechanical weeding device is very very damaging to our newly planted trees. Even a little bit of damage can go can destroy the cambium layer of a young tree. It's so thin. I mean, it's paper thin, that little bark layer when the trees are younger. So it's super important to sort of hand weed around the base in these trees. And also, believe it or not, that dog urine is really bad for younger trees with the high amount of urea and whatever else is inside there, the acid on. There've been a few studies done I've read that it's really bad, and especially in our city dog parks, we actually come and put chicken wire around about 2 feet around the outside of the tree on our tree stakes. So we also do put out 2x2 tree stakes, usually 2, but in the dog parks we're doing 3, so we can actually kind of get a circle of the chicken wire around these newly planted trees, at least get them a little bit older. I mean, once the trees get older, if their bark layer, that bark cambium layer gets wider, gets bigger, and it's less damaging to the trees. But when they're young, it's like I said, it's like a paper thin layer that's protecting the cambium of the tree. So the tissue that's important for transport to xylem and the phloem and whatnot. So yeah, we are protecting trees. We're also tying them with something called arbor tie. It's a softer tie than some of the plastic tie that used to be used, which could be a lot more damaging to that thin bark layer again. So yeah, so trying our best. Seems like some of the city staff are the ones that are the hardest on some of our trees. So we're trying to do more education and more training on working around our newly planted trees.
Okay, we have just a few more questions here to finish it up. This has been a great hour. Is the city of Salem updating its urban forestry management plan? And do you know when it was last updated?
I'm not sure they've ever had an urban forestry management plan. They've done what was it? I have it right behind me. 2013, they did I'm not sure it was a management plan, but they did an analysis, a tree inventory analysis, basically just more research and understanding what the canopy level was and sort of moving forward. But we are working on one actively now that we hope to have out for 2025, which would be an urban forestry master plan. But I know that every 2 years we do a tree canopy assessment is what they call it. Sorry, took me a little while to get there. But they're doing the tree canopy assessment in sort of in line with the city trying to get 27% canopy coverage. Right now there's 24% or 25% canopy coverage on city property. So they're trying to get to 27 as their goal.
Do you have any suggestions on how to pitch native tree plantings to city councils?
Yeah, just do it with a lot of heart and you know, I think touching base with the community and the importance of making that connection to community and to space and to place is definitely going to should be near and dear to city council. Recently, we've got a lot of new city council and I've had lots of support outwardly about trees recently. So I'm excited about pushing more tree programs here in Salem, but I think just showing your passion and showing, you know, what trees can do for the community. I think it's a pretty easy pitch.
One last question for you. Are you concerned about sudden oak death here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a possibility, and just when we've got EAB and it's hopefully it's a while before sudden oak death comes here. We do have some other, you know, small oak issues that we deal with, some the oak wilt currently, but yeah, no, I hope not. Let's say that.
Well, other things in the chat right now are several messages of thank yous. So I wanted to read one to you. I'm very impressed with the strategic initiatives you have started. It's a sea of change from how city trees were planted and managed before. So thank you. So there are other thank you messages in there too, if you want to check those out. But at this time, we are going to conclude our presentation today. Milan, thank you so much for joining us and talking to us about the work that you do.
And thanks for having me, Becky.